I hate if statements. I hate if statements, else if statements, and case statements. And if there's any way possible that I can get rid of them in my code, I look for it. If I've tried to write them, if I write an if statement within my code, I contemplate whether I've made a bad design decision. This is an extreme stance and something that doesn't apply at every single moment while I'm doing my software development, but it does apply it in the moment of, say, for the microblogger tutorial that we have on Jumpstart Lab. And over time, imagining that the microblogger application could grow and grow, this process command method, would continue to grow and become an eyesore within your application. One way we might refactor this statement is to create several methods for some of this functionality. Oftentimes, if this were to match several different statements, the input were to consider not just the first letter being quit or the last letter being quit, maybe the first or second word being quit, we might consider creating a new method. So in this case, quit command match, given the input, might be where we offload the rest of this work. For now, we'll leave this as input equals quit or Q, and then we return whether that value is true or not. And in the same way, what we execute eventually could be larger, more complicated. So it might be easier to do is just specify a method, quit command execute. And define within that method the code that we need to execute. We could continue to refactor the remaining pieces in a very similar way. But it's important to take note again of a pattern here that was emerging, is that the quit command what matches also has a quit command execute. These two statements really represent one piece of logic within the system. And so it's important that perhaps we can use classes to represent that information. So what I'd like to define is a quit command. And inside that quit command, we define whether it matches and whether it executes. And here now, instead of what we defined before, we say quit equals quit command not new. And now we match on this, which says quit command underscore match. And whether it matches, and then we execute the code if it does match. We could continue to build the rest of these commands as we've done for the quit command in the same way. Great. What notice here now is actually what's happening is that it becomes clear what's taking place. We have an object in which the match is taking place, and then if it does match, we execute on the thing. And if we have a match here on tweet, then we execute on the tweet. And really what we're doing is we're iterating or moving through an entire list of each of these commands and then finding the one that matches and then executing that one. And so it might make more sense if we actually try to combine these commands into an array and then use Ruby's find method to find the matching command. Now with that found command, we simply need to write execute. And now before we remove this code, we've subtly introduced a new bug, one that didn't exist before in the previous code. Previously, if a command didn't match, essentially no code was executed. And the problem now that we've introduced into our system is that when no command matches, if nil is returned, and what would happen is nil is being called execute. And that's a problem. And essentially what we need to do is create a command that always matches, a command that would always take place, but essentially no action would be executed when it's found. Now the no action command is not really remarkable as far as its structure or layout as functionality, but it's important to show here, so I'm going to take a moment to write that out. When the no action command, whether it matches, it's always true. That way, there is nothing that slips by the no action command. It's just important that the no action command be the last command in the list. Otherwise, it will clobber other actions. So now what we have is a list of valid commands that will iterate through each one, and it will find the one that matches. If none match, then the last one will of course match, and then of course execute. So now I think successfully we can delete this code. Now this is great as far as functionality goes because in the future we can add more commands as we want. So we can define something as a small refactoring is moving these into here, into a new function. So if we had our commands, we can move them into its own commands function. Might be a start. And then we might also just write command for input and give it the input and essentially move this code in here. Given our command input, we might now execute the command that we found. And no longer is our process command an eyesore within our application. And in the future, perhaps our commands itself would become an eyesore, but we can address that later.